I'm not looking for forgiveness. Honestly, I'm not even looking for understanding. There was a period in my life when I was a genuinely terrible person, and the worst part is that I knew exactly what I was doing. I wasn't some troubled kid who fell in with the wrong crowd. I wasn't a victim of bad influences. Every bad decision I made belonged to me. Nobody forced my hand. Nobody talked me into it. I chose it. Back in 2004, I had convinced myself that I had discovered the perfect scam. At the time, I thought I was smart. Now looking back, I think I was lucky. Lucky to stay out of prison. Lucky not to get shot. Lucky to be alive. For about 8 months, I drifted across small towns throughout the Midwest. Not cities. Not places where people locked every door and watched strangers with suspicion. I mean the kinds of towns where everyone knew everyone else's business. The kinds of places where the same families had lived there for generations. The kinds of places where people still waved at passing cars. Places where trust hadn't completely disappeared yet. To me, those towns looked like opportunity. Every few days, I would arrive somewhere new. I'd stop at a diner, drink cheap coffee, and spend hours watching people. Sometimes I'd sit near a window pretending to read a newspaper. Sometimes I'd park across the street from a grocery store. Other times I'd wander around neighborhoods pretending to be lost. I was always looking for the same thing, the same target, an elderly couple. Even now, admitting that makes me feel sick. But it's the truth. They couldn't just be old. They had to look vulnerable. I hate saying that. I hate even remembering the way I used to think. But back then, I paid attention to everything. How slowly they walked, whether one of them needed a cane, whether they seemed isolated, whether they smiled at strangers, whether they still looked like the kind of people who believed most folks were basically good. Those were the people I chose, the people least likely to suspect someone like me. Once I found the right house, I would spend a day or two observing it. I'd learn their routines, when they left, when they came home, whether visitors stopped by, whether neighbors paid attention. Then I'd wait until after dark, not midnight, not late enough to scare someone. Usually around 9 o'clock, that was always the sweet spot. People had settled into their evening. The dishes were done. The television was on. Maybe they were getting ready for bed. Maybe they were sitting together in the living room watching the news. It was the perfect time to catch them relaxed, comfortable, unprepared. My routine almost never changed. I'd park my car somewhere visible enough to support the story I was about to tell. Then I'd hurry to the front door and knock hard. Sometimes I'd even pound on it. Just enough urgency to make them answer quick. The moment the door opened, the performance began. My car broke down. My wife is in labor. My phone died. I need help. The details shifted depending on the situation, but the structure was always the same. An emergency, a desperate stranger, a request for help. And embarrassingly, shamefully, it worked almost every time. Most people wanted to help. That's what made the scam work. Once they invited me inside, I'd wait. I'd drink the glass of water they offered. I'd thank them. I'd let them lower their guard. Then, when the moment felt right, I'd make my move. Tie them up. Take whatever valuables I could find. Cash. Jewelry. Anything easy to carry. Then I'd disappear. I know how awful that sounds, because it is awful. I never wanted to hurt anyone. You can decide for yourself whether that matters. I understand if it doesn't. I was still a criminal. Still a predator. Still somebody who targeted decent people because I thought they were easy. But violence was never the goal. Money was. At least, that's what I told myself. Funny how people always find ways to make themselves sound better in their own memories. Everything changed on a cold October night. I remember that night more clearly than some of the birthdays I've celebrated. The air had that sharp autumn bite that sneaks through your jacket. The trees were already losing most of their leaves. The sky turned dark early. I had spent most of the afternoon driving through back roads that seemed to go nowhere. Eventually, I arrived in a tiny rural town that I won't name, partly because I don't want trouble, partly because I'm still not sure what happened there. The town felt forgotten, like something time had skipped over. There were long stretches of road without streetlights. Old houses sat far apart from one another. The woods seemed endless. Everywhere you looked, there were trees, dense woods, dark woods, the kind of woods that seem to absorb sound, the kind where you can stand 10 feet inside and suddenly feel completely alone. Eventually, I found a house that seemed perfect. At least, that's what I thought. The place sat unusually close to the road. There wasn't much of a front yard, just a narrow patch of grass and a gravel driveway. An old pickup truck rested beside the house, half sunk into the ground from years of sitting there. Behind the property was nothing but forest. Miles of it, a black wall of trees stretching into darkness. I remember thinking how convenient that could be. If anything went wrong, I could disappear into those woods and be gone before anyone found me. At the time, it seemed like a comforting thought, a smart escape route. What I didn't realize was that those woods were about to become the only reason I survived. A little after 9 o'clock, I walked up the front steps. The porch boards creaked under my feet. I knocked. Then I waited. The door opened almost immediately. Standing there was an elderly woman. At first glance, she looked exactly like the type of person I usually targeted. Gray hair, small frame, wrinkled skin, soft features. But the second I looked into her eyes, something felt wrong. Most people reacted the same way when I showed up, pretending to be desperate. Concern, confusion, worry, maybe a little fear. This woman showed none of those things. She didn't seem surprised to see me. She didn't seem alarmed. She didn't even seem curious. She simply smiled. And something about that smile made my stomach tighten. It wasn't warm, it wasn't welcoming, it felt rehearsed, like she'd been expecting someone to knock on that door. Like she already knew how the evening was going to end. Even now, after all these years, I have trouble describing it. But I remember one thing clearly. Every instinct I had told me to leave. Immediately. I should have listened. Instead, I started telling my story. I should have listened to that feeling. Instead, I launched into the same story I'd told dozens of times before. My car broke down about a mile back, I said, putting just enough panic into my voice to make it believable. My wife is at the hospital. She's about to have a baby, and my phone died. I was hoping maybe I could use yours. Normally, people interrupted me with questions. They wanted details. They wanted to know where my car was. What hospital? How far away? Something. This woman didn't ask a single question. Before I could even finish the story, she reached out and placed a hand on my shoulder. Her skin felt surprisingly cold. "Come inside, sweetheart," she said softly. "Everything's going to be fine." The words themselves weren't strange. It was the way she said them. Like she wasn't reassuring me. Like she was reassuring herself. Or maybe promising something. I can't explain it any better than that. The tone unsettled me immediately. Still, I followed her inside. Because that's what I always did. Because I was focused on my scam. Because I ignored every warning sign standing right in front of me. The house smelled old, not dirty. Just old. The scent of aging wood, old furniture, and decades of memories trapped inside the walls. The living room was dimly lit by a couple of lamps. Heavy curtains covered the windows. Family photographs filled nearly every wall. There were pictures of children, pictures of hunting trips, graduation photos, wedding photos, the kind of family history people build over generations. The woman motioned toward a couch. "Sit down and rest." I thanked her and sat. She disappeared down a hallway without another word. For a moment, everything was quiet. I remember looking around the room and trying to calculate my next move. How many people lived here? How quickly could I get control of the situation? Was there cash, jewelry, anything worth taking? Then I heard footsteps, heavy footsteps. Not the slow shuffle of an elderly person, something much heavier. A moment later, a man stepped into the room. And when I say man, I mean a giant. The guy looked like he belonged on the front of a hunting magazine. He had to be at least 6'4", maybe taller, broad shoulders, thick arms, a massive black beard. The kind of person who made you feel smaller just by standing near him. He looked to be somewhere around 30 years old, maybe early 30s, definitely not old, definitely not vulnerable. And in his hands was a hunting rifle. The moment I saw him, my confidence vanished. Younger people were always unpredictable. That was one of the reasons I usually targeted older couples. Younger people asked more questions, they reacted faster, they fought back. A giant man carrying a rifle was the last thing I wanted to see. He stopped in the doorway and stared at me, not aggressively, not friendly, just stared. The kind of stare that makes you wonder whether you're being evaluated. Then the old woman returned, still smiling. Always smiling. "Oh," she said cheerfully, "this is my son Caleb." Caleb never took his eyes off me, not once. The woman continued, "He'll go check your car." My stomach instantly dropped. If Caleb went looking for my car, everything would fall apart. The entire story would collapse in less than 5 minutes. I opened my mouth to come up with some excuse. Maybe I could say it was farther away than I thought. Maybe I could claim I remembered another landmark. Maybe. The woman suddenly turned her head toward the hallway. "Walter," she shouted. Her voice echoed through the house. "Walter, come meet our guest." Something about the word guest bothered me. A lot. A few moments later, another set of footsteps approached. Slow, dragging. An elderly man entered the room. He walked with a noticeable limp. Unlike the woman, he didn't smile. Unlike Caleb, he didn't stare. He simply looked at me, quietly, patiently, as though he already knew everything about me, as though he was waiting for something. And that's when I noticed the smell. At first, it was faint, just a hint of something unpleasant. Then suddenly it hit me all at once. A wave of odor so strong it nearly made me gag. It wasn't garbage. It wasn't dirty laundry. It wasn't spoiled food. It was something rotten. Something deep and sickening. The kind of smell that instantly triggers a reaction you can't control. Every survival instinct I possessed lit up at once. I felt my pulse spike, my chest tighten. The room suddenly seemed smaller. The air felt heavier. I glanced around, trying to figure out where it was coming from. I couldn't. The smell seemed to be everywhere, and somehow nobody else appeared to notice it. Not Caleb, not Walter, not the old woman. The three of them simply stood there, watching me. The silence stretched. Nobody spoke, nobody moved. The only sound came from an old clock ticking somewhere in the house. Tick, tick, tick. I realized then that I was no longer thinking about robbing them. Not even a little. I wanted out. Immediately. Every instinct in my body was screaming the same thing. Leave now. I stood slowly, trying not to appear nervous, trying not to draw attention, trying not to look like a man who suddenly believed he was in serious danger. Actually, I said with a nervous laugh, I think I left something in my car. Nobody responded right away. The woman's smile faded slightly, just slightly, enough for me to notice. Walter shifted his weight. Caleb tightened his grip on the rifle. For a brief second, nobody moved. Then the woman stepped forward. You don't need to leave yet. The words sounded friendly. The tone did not. I forced another smile. I'll just be a second. I took a step toward the front door. Walter took a step too, matching my movement, not blocking me, not exactly, just staying between me and the easiest path out. My heart started hammering. I took another step. Walter took another. The woman moved closer, still smiling, still talking gently, still acting as though everything was perfectly normal. Nothing about it felt normal. The distance between us kept shrinking. Every second felt heavier than the last. I was suddenly aware of every detail. The rifle, the smell, the silence, the old man's eyes, the woman's smile, the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I reached a point maybe 6 feet from the door, then 4 feet, then 3. Nobody seemed happy about it. Nobody seemed willing to let me leave. That was the moment I stopped trying to be polite. I made my decision, and I ran. The reaction was immediate. Walter lunged. For an old man, he moved surprisingly fast. His fingers caught the back of my jacket. For a split second, I thought he had me. Then the fabric slipped through his grip. I yanked free. The front door flew open. Cold night air hit my face. I sprinted off the porch and ran toward my car. Relief flooded through me. I was outside. I was almost gone. A few more seconds and this whole nightmare would be over. Then I reached the vehicle, and everything got worse. All 4 tires were flat. Not naturally flat. Not from nails. Not from bad luck. Slashed, every single one. The rubber hung in shredded strips. The cuts were clean. Deliberate. Fresh. For a second, my brain refused to process what I was seeing. I simply stood there, staring. Then realization hit. Someone had done this while I was inside. Someone had made sure I couldn't leave. The shouting started behind me. The friendly voices were gone now. Completely gone. He's outside. The voice sounded furious. Not concerned. Not worried. Angry. Very angry. I spun around. The front door stood open. Movement flashed inside the house. My panic finally took over. I didn't think. I didn't plan. I ran. Straight toward the woods behind the property. Branches slapped my face as I crossed the tree line. Roots caught at my feet. Dead leaves crunched beneath my shoes. The darkness swallowed me almost immediately. Within seconds, I could barely see where I was going. I just kept running, faster, deeper, farther away from that house. The cold air burned my lungs. My legs ached. Twigs snapped beneath every step. Eventually, I stumbled behind a massive oak tree and dropped into a crouch. My chest felt like it might explode. I covered my mouth and tried to quiet my breathing. For several seconds, all I could hear was my own heartbeat. Then everything became silent. No voices, no footsteps, nothing. For one brief moment, I thought I might have escaped. Then I heard it. Crunch. A footstep. Far away. Crunch. Another. Slow, heavy, deliberate. Not somebody running, somebody searching. The footsteps moved closer, then closer still. Each one seemed louder than the last. I pressed myself against the tree, barely breathing, barely moving. The footsteps continued. Steady, patient, unhurried. Whoever was coming wasn't worried. That frightened me more than anything, because it meant they believed I had nowhere to go. And somewhere in the darkness, something told me they might be right. The footsteps kept getting closer, slow, heavy, measured. Whoever was walking through those woods wasn't crashing around blindly. They weren't stumbling over roots or pushing through brush the way I had. They were moving like someone who knew exactly where they were, and exactly what they were looking for. I pressed my back against the rough bark of the oak tree and forced myself to stay still. Every instinct told me to run. But running would make noise. Noise would get me noticed, so I stayed where I was, frozen listening. The night had become unnaturally quiet. No wind, no insects, no distant traffic, nothing. Just those footsteps. Crunch, pause, getting closer each time. My breathing felt deafening. I was terrified that whoever was out there would hear it. The cold October air stung my lungs, but sweat still trickled down my neck. I remember staring at the leaves scattered across the forest floor, trying to focus on something, anything, other than the fear crawling through my chest. Then I saw him, Caleb. He emerged from the darkness like he'd been carved out of it. For a second, all I noticed was his size. Even among the trees, he looked enormous. The rifle hung loosely in one hand as he moved between the trunks. He wasn't rushing. That was the part that scared me. If somebody's running after you, at least you know they're worried about losing you. Caleb wasn't worried. He walked slowly, patiently, like a hunter, like someone tracking a wounded animal. The moonlight filtered through the branches just enough for me to make out his face, expressionless, calm, almost bored. He couldn't have been more than 2 feet from my hiding spot. 2 feet, that's all. If he'd turned his head slightly to the left, he would have seen me immediately. I could hear him breathing. I could hear the faint creak of the rifle sling against his jacket. I could even smell cigarette smoke lingering on his clothes. Time seemed to stop. Every muscle in my body locked up. I didn't blink. I didn't move. I wasn't even sure I was breathing anymore. The seconds stretched into what felt like hours. Then, somehow, he kept walking. One step, then another, then another. He passed right by me. My heart was pounding so hard I was certain he had to hear it. Yet he never looked my way, never slowed down, never reacted. He simply continued deeper into the woods. Eventually, the sound of his footsteps began to fade, then fade even more, until finally they disappeared altogether. Still, I didn't move. I couldn't. Fear had rooted me in place. For all I knew, he was standing 20 feet away, waiting for me to reveal myself. So I stayed there, motionless, listening. Minutes passed, or maybe it was longer. I honestly couldn't tell. The adrenaline had completely destroyed my sense of time. Eventually, the numbness in my legs became impossible to ignore. My knees ached, my back hurt. The cold was beginning to seep through my clothes. Most importantly, I realized I couldn't stay there forever. Sooner or later, I had to move. Very slowly, I lowered myself to the ground. Then I began crawling, not walking, not running, crawling. The leaves were damp beneath my hands. Twigs poked into my palms. Mud stained my jeans. I didn't care. I just wanted to get away from that property. Away from that house, away from that family. Every few feet, I'd stop and listen, then crawl again, stop. Listen, move. The process felt endless. The forest seemed much larger now than it had when I'd run into it. Trees stretched in every direction. Darkness swallowed everything beyond a few yards. Several times I became convinced I was moving in circles. Panic kept threatening to take over. I forced myself to stay focused. One direction. Keep moving. Just keep moving. Eventually, I noticed something through the trees. A faint glow. At first, I thought it might be moonlight. Then I realized it was coming from the road. Relief washed over me. I wasn't lost. I was near the edge of the property. Carefully, I moved toward the light. The closer I got, the more clearly I could see the house again. Part of me wanted to avoid looking at it entirely, but curiosity got the better of me. I know that sounds ridiculous. Even now, I don't understand why I looked. Maybe I wanted answers. Maybe I wanted to know what had almost happened to me. Or maybe fear and curiosity are closer cousins than most people realize. Whatever the reason, I found a spot behind a cluster of bushes and looked toward the house. The sight sent another chill through my body. The old woman was standing in the front window, perfectly still. Not pacing, not searching, not talking, just standing there, watching the woods, waiting. The glow from the lamp behind her illuminated her face, and even from that distance I could tell she was smiling. The same smile, the exact same smile she'd worn when she opened the door. The smile that had bothered me from the very beginning. I remember wondering how long she'd been standing there. 5 minutes? 20? An hour? There was something deeply unsettling about the certainty she seemed to possess. Most people would have called the police. Most people would have turned on lights. Most people would have been frightened by a stranger running into the woods behind their home. She wasn't frightened. She looked patient. as if she expected me to come back, as if she knew something I didn't. A movement near the side of the house caught my attention. I immediately ducked lower. After a few seconds, I risked another glance. Caleb, he had returned from the woods. The rifle was still in his hand. The old man stood near the porch. The three of them appeared to be talking. I couldn't hear the conversation, but judging by their body language, they weren't celebrating. They weren't relaxed. They looked frustrated, and that realization terrified me, because it suggested they hadn't wanted me to leave. Not at all. I stayed hidden until they finally went back inside. Even then, I waited longer. 10 minutes, maybe 15. I wasn't taking chances. When I was finally certain nobody was outside, I began making my way toward the road. My car sat exactly where I'd left it. The sight of it brought only a brief sense of comfort. The tires were completely ruined. There was no fixing them, no driving away, no quick escape. I checked the road in both directions. Empty. Not a single vehicle, not a single house nearby. Nothing, just darkness. For a moment, I considered staying with the car until morning. The idea lasted maybe 3 seconds. There was no way I was spending another minute near that property. Then I remembered something. The road sloped downhill, not steeply, but enough. A crazy idea formed in my head. At that point, crazy ideas were all I had left. I climbed into the driver's seat. The keys were still in the ignition. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped them. I released the parking brake. For a second, nothing happened. Then the car began moving, slowly at first, barely rolling, but it was moving. I sat in complete darkness as gravity pulled the vehicle away from the house. The ruined tires bumped and dragged against the pavement. Every sound felt impossibly loud. I kept glancing into the rearview mirror, expecting headlights, expecting the truck, expecting Caleb, expecting something. Nothing appeared. The house gradually disappeared behind the curve of the road. Only then did I feel the first real hint of relief. Not safety, just relief. The kind of relief a drowning person feels after breaking the surface long enough to grab a single breath. The car continued rolling for what felt like forever. In reality, it was probably less than a quarter mile. Eventually, the damaged tires created too much resistance. The vehicle slowed, then slowed again. Finally, it stopped completely. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my wallet and got out. Then I started running, again. The road stretched ahead through darkness. Cold air burned in my lungs. My legs screamed in protest, but fear kept pushing me forward. I ran until the woods thinned. I ran until I saw distant streetlights. I ran until I reached the outskirts of town. Only then did I finally stop. Bent over, gasping for air, my entire body trembling. An elderly gas station attendant found me sitting outside a closed convenience store sometime after midnight. He asked if I was okay. I told him my car had broken down. That part, at least, wasn't a lie anymore. Hours later, I arranged for a tow truck. The driver never asked many questions. Neither did I. I watched through the windshield as we hauled the car away from that road, away from those woods, away from that house. The entire time, one question kept repeating in my mind. What exactly had happened in there? I still don't know. I've spent years thinking about it. Maybe they were criminals. Maybe they had done something terrible. Maybe the smell had a perfectly normal explanation. Maybe Caleb slashed my tires because he saw through my story and wanted to trap a thief. Maybe they were simply strange people protecting themselves from a stranger who showed up at their door in the middle of the night. I've considered every explanation imaginable, and yet none of them fully explain what I felt. The fear wasn't normal. The atmosphere wasn't normal. The way they watched me wasn't normal. Most of all, that smile wasn't normal. To this day, I can still see it, sometimes as clearly as if I were standing in front of that house again. A small old woman standing in a dimly lit window, smiling patiently, watching the woods, waiting, as though she knew something was out there, something far worse than me. And for the first time in my life, I found myself wondering whether I had accidentally knocked on the wrong door. Because that night, I hadn't found victims. I had found something else entirely. And whatever it was, I don't think it wanted me inside the house. I think it wanted me to stay. People like to imagine there's a moment when someone changes. A single event, a wake-up call, a near-death experience, something dramatic, something cinematic. The truth is usually messier than that. Life doesn't often hand you a clean turning point. Most of the time, people change slowly. They drift, they stumble, they convince themselves they're doing better while secretly carrying the same flaws around like luggage. That's what happened to me. After the incident at the house, I stopped running scams. At least I stopped running that scam. I wish I could tell you I suddenly became a decent human being. I didn't. The fear from that night stayed with me for a long time, but fear isn't the same thing as morality. Fear teaches caution. It doesn't necessarily teach character. For several years, I bounced between jobs, construction, warehouse work, delivery driving, anything that paid enough to cover rent and keep food in the refrigerator. There were stretches when life felt almost normal. I'd wake up, drink terrible coffee, go to work, come home exhausted, watch television until I fell asleep in a recliner. The kind of ordinary routine millions of people live every day. And honestly, I liked it. Normal felt good. Normal felt safe. But I still carried something ugly inside me. The part of me that always looked for shortcuts. The part that wanted more without earning it. That part never completely disappeared. It just waited. Years passed. Then, about 11 years ago, I got a job working overnight security at a shopping center outside a small city in Ohio. At first, it sounded perfect. No customers. No managers constantly checking on me. No coworkers creating drama. Just quiet. A radio. A ring of keys. And 8 hours of getting paid to make sure nobody broke into stores. The plaza wasn't an indoor mall. It was one of those sprawling outdoor shopping centers built along a long stretch of pavement. Clothing stores, shoe stores, restaurants, an electronics store, a grocery store, a pet supply store. A few businesses that seemed to change owners every year. Behind the storefronts ran a network of service corridors and delivery areas that most customers never saw. That was my territory, the hidden side, the backside. The side that looked completely different after midnight. My shift started at 10 o'clock every night. By then, most businesses were closed, employees had gone home. Parking lots sat nearly empty. Only a few scattered lights remained. The giant signs above the stores glowed against the darkness. Sometimes fog rolled through during colder months. Sometimes rain hammered the metal roofs. Sometimes snow piled against loading docks. No matter the season, the place always felt different after midnight. Like the shopping center belonged to something else once people left. The first few months were easy. Honestly, I enjoyed them. I developed little routines. I'd stop at the same gas station every evening before work. The cashier knew me by name. I'd grab a coffee, a bottle of water, maybe a candy bar if I felt like pretending I still had the metabolism of a 20-year-old. Then I'd drive to work listening to late-night radio, sports talk, old rock stations, whatever helped pass the time. The security office sat behind the plaza in a narrow service area. Nothing fancy, just a small room with monitors, filing cabinets, a desk, and a coffee maker that looked older than some of the stores. Most nights followed the exact same pattern. Check cameras, walk the property, check doors, document anything unusual. Repeat, hour after hour, night after night. At first, the quiet felt peaceful. Eventually, it became unbearable. People don't realize how strange prolonged silence can be. During the day, your brain is constantly processing information. Voices, cars, conversations, music, movement. At night, especially when you're alone, your mind starts searching for stimulation. Anything to break the monotony. That's where my problems began. Not because I needed money, not really, because I was bored. And boredom can be dangerous when it's mixed with bad habits. One night, while reviewing camera feeds, I noticed something interesting. A blind spot. It was small, a loading entrance behind one of the clothing stores. The camera angle missed part of the doorway by only a few feet. Anyone standing in exactly the right spot disappeared from view completely. The discovery fascinated me. I don't know why. Maybe because I had spent years looking for weaknesses in systems. Maybe because old instincts never truly die. Whatever the reason, I started paying attention. I began looking for more. During patrols, I'd stop and test camera coverage. I'd stand in different locations. Later, I'd review footage. If I couldn't see myself, I made a note. It became a game, a stupid game, the kind of game that seems harmless while you're playing it. Over several weeks, I built a mental map of the property. Every blind spot, every weak angle, every place cameras couldn't fully reach. I told myself it was professional curiosity, part of the job. That was a lie. Deep down, I already knew why I was doing it. The temptation arrived gradually, the same way temptation always arrives, quietly, reasonably. One small step at a time. The first thing I stole was a baseball cap. Nothing expensive, nothing anybody would miss. At least that's what I told myself. I took it from a display near one of the blind spots. Then I hid it outside behind a dumpster enclosure. When my shift ended, I drove around back and picked it up. Simple, easy, nobody noticed. The next night I checked camera footage. Nothing, no evidence, no alarms, no questions, no consequences. The feeling was familiar, too familiar. I hadn't realized how much I'd missed it. That rush, that secret little thrill. The dangerous confidence that comes from getting away with something. A few days later, I stole a shirt, then a hoodie, then a pair of sneakers. Nothing huge. Never enough to attract attention immediately. Just enough to convince myself it wasn't serious. I became very good at lying to myself. People think self-deception requires effort. It doesn't. It's actually frighteningly easy. You simply repeat a lie often enough that it starts sounding reasonable. They won't miss it. The company makes millions. It's only one item. Everyone steals. I'm not hurting anybody. The lies get easier every time. Months passed. The thefts continued. Nobody confronted me. Nobody questioned me. At least, that's what I believed. Then something changed. Something I still struggle to explain. The first incident happened around 3 o'clock in the morning. I remember the exact time because I checked my watch afterward. 3 in the morning is a strange hour. Anyone who's worked overnight shifts understands that. It's the hour when exhaustion settles into your bones. The hour when even bright lights feel dim. The hour when the world seems suspended between yesterday and tomorrow. I was checking one of the vacant retail spaces near the far end of the plaza. The store had been empty for over a year. No inventory, no furniture worth mentioning. Just dusty shelves and empty aisles. The company still paid security to inspect it regularly, so I unlocked the service door and stepped inside. The beam from my flashlight swept across dust-covered floors. Everything looked exactly as it always did. Abandoned, silent, dead. Then I heard laughter. Children, at least it sounded like children. Several voices, young voices, playful voices, echoing somewhere deeper inside the building. I stopped walking immediately. The laughter stopped too. The silence that followed felt almost unnatural. I stood there listening, waiting, trying to convince myself I'd imagined it. Then the laughter returned. Only this time it came from somewhere else. A different aisle, a different direction. Like whoever was making the sound had moved instantly. A chill crawled up my spine. I turned toward the noise. Nothing. No movement. No shadows. No figures. Just empty darkness stretching between dusty shelves. And then the laughter came again. Closer. Much closer. As if someone was standing only a few feet away. Laughing. Watching, waiting for me to react. The laughter came again. Closer this time. Close enough that every muscle in my body tightened. It wasn't loud. That somehow made it worse. If you've ever been alone in a large building after midnight, you know how sound behaves. It bounces. It echoes. It plays tricks on your ears. But this didn't sound like an echo. It sounded deliberate. Like somebody was standing just beyond the reach of my flashlight, watching me. Trying not to be seen. I swung the beam toward the nearest aisle. Nothing. The dust-covered shelves stood exactly where they'd always been. Empty. Silent. Harmless. Yet my stomach had already started knotting itself into a tight ball. "Hello?" I called out. My voice sounded strange inside the vacant building. Too loud, too sharp. It echoed down the aisles and disappeared. No answer. For a few seconds, everything remained still. Then the laughter returned. This time there were more voices. Not one child, several. Maybe 5, maybe 10. I couldn't tell. The sound bounced around the store so strangely that it seemed to come from everywhere at once. One moment it was behind me. The next it was somewhere to my left. Then farther away. Then closer again. I felt ridiculous. A grown man standing alone in an abandoned retail space, shining a flashlight at empty shelves while chasing sounds that didn't make sense. I told myself there had to be a logical explanation. Teenagers, that's what I settled on. Teenagers had probably found a way inside. Teenagers love doing stupid things. Hell, I'd done enough stupid things myself. The explanation fit. At least it fit better than anything else. "Store's closed," I shouted. The laughter stopped. I waited. Nothing. Then, from somewhere deep inside the building, a single child laughed again. One short burst, almost like a response, almost like a challenge. The sound sent another chill through me. I began moving deeper into the store, slowly. My flashlight swept left and right. Dust floated through the beam. Rows of empty shelves cast long shadows across the floor. Every corner suddenly seemed darker than it should have been. The farther I walked, the more uncomfortable I became. Not because I saw anything, because I didn't. The place should have revealed something by now. A person, a movement, a hiding spot, anything. Instead, there was nothing. Just laughter appearing and disappearing throughout an empty building. I searched for nearly 10 minutes. Every aisle, every storage room, every corner. Nothing. Eventually, the sound faded completely. The building returned to silence. The kind of silence that almost convinces you the whole thing never happened. By the time I returned to the security office, I had nearly talked myself out of being worried. Lack of sleep. That was the explanation. Everyone who works night shifts eventually blames exhaustion. It's convenient. And most of the time it's true. Sleep deprivation can make your mind do strange things. It can blur the line between reality and imagination. So that's what I told myself. I pulled up the camera footage from the vacant store. I watched the entire incident from beginning to end. There was nothing unusual, no children, no intruders, no movement, just me. Walking through an empty building with a flashlight, stopping occasionally. Looking around, talking to nobody. The footage made me feel foolish, embarrassed even. By the time my shift ended, I'd almost convinced myself I'd imagined everything. Almost. The next 2 nights were my days off. I spent most of them sleeping, then sleeping some more. One of the strange side effects of overnight work is that your days off don't feel like days off. Your body never fully adjusts. You spend half your free time trying to repair your sleep schedule, and the other half destroying it again. When I returned to work, I found myself thinking about the laughter. Part of me hoped it would happen again, not because I enjoyed it, because I wanted proof. Proof that I wasn't losing my mind. The guard who covered my days off was an older guy named Frank, retired police officer, thick glasses, permanent coffee stain on his uniform shirt, the kind of man who always seemed tired but somehow never stopped talking. During shift change, I casually asked if he'd noticed anything strange. He looked at me over the rim of his coffee cup. Like what? I hesitated. The question sounded stupid the moment it left my mouth. Kids sneaking into the vacant store. Frank frowned. No, you sure? Pretty sure? No alarms? Nope. No complaints? He shook his head, then he gave me a suspicious look. Why? I almost told him. Almost. Instead, I shrugged. Just checking. Frank laughed. Only thing living in that place is dust. At the time, I desperately wanted him to be right. That night started normally. The stores closed, the customers disappeared. Business as usual. Around 2:45 in the morning, I entered the shoe store. Not because of security concerns. Not because I was checking doors. Because I planned to steal. I know that's ugly. But that's the truth. There was a pair of expensive running shoes I'd been staring at for weeks. Every patrol took me past them. Every night I found myself looking. And every night the temptation grew stronger. The cameras had blind spots. I knew exactly where they were. I knew exactly how long I could remain unseen. I knew exactly how to remove the box without triggering suspicion. By then, the thefts had become routine, dangerously routine. I walked down the aisle carrying my flashlight. The store was dark except for emergency lighting. Rows of shoes stretched into the shadows. The place smelled faintly of rubber and cardboard. Everything felt ordinary, until something rushed past me. Fast. So fast I barely registered it. A blur, a movement, a shape. Not directly in front of me, not across the eye reacted. I jumped so hard the shoebox nearly slipped from my hands. My flashlight beam jerked across the shelves. The aisle was empty, completely empty. The movement had lasted less than a second. Yet every hair on my arm stood up instantly. I spun around. Nothing. No one, no. For a brief moment I stood frozen. Then I heard it. The laughter. Again, the same laughter. The exact same laughter from the vacant store, only this time there were more voices. Many more. Children laughing, dozens of them. Maybe not literally dozens. But that's how it felt. The sound flooded the store, bouncing from aisle to aisle, echoing from every direction. I felt my pulse begin to race. Who's there? I shouted. No answer. Only laughter. I moved toward the sound. The laughter retreated. I followed, it moved again, always staying just out of reach. Like something was leading me deeper into the building. The realization made my stomach turn. I stopped walking. The laughter stopped too. The silence that followed felt heavy, oppressive, wrong. Then I saw it. At the far end of an aisle, standing perfectly still, a child. At least that's what I thought at first. The figure was small, no taller than 8 or 9 years old. Its shape was unmistakably human, but something about it wasn't right. The figure appeared completely black, not dark clothing, not shadows hiding details, black, as though somebody had cut the shape of a child out of the darkness itself. It stood motionless, watching me. My flashlight beam landed directly on it. The light should have illuminated a face, a shirt, a pair of shoes, something. Instead, the figure remained featureless, a silhouette, a void, a hole in reality shaped like a child. I remember blinking several times, trying to force my eyes to focus, trying to convince myself I was seeing a trick of light. The figure slowly raised one hand and waved, a small, friendly, almost playful wave. The sight hit me harder than if it had charged at me. Because it felt intentional. personal, like it knew I could see it, like it wanted me to see it. I started walking toward it, one cautious step, then another. My heart hammered against my ribs, every instinct screamed at me to leave. Yet curiosity kept pulling me forward. The closer I got, the more wrong the figure felt. Not threatening, not aggressive, just wrong. Like something pretending to be a child without fully understanding what a child was supposed to look like. Then I blinked, and it vanished. Gone, no movement, no running footsteps, no fading shape, just gone. One moment it existed, the next moment it didn't. I stopped dead in the aisle. My mouth had gone dry. I swept the flashlight beam across every shelf, every corner, every display. Nothing. The figure had disappeared completely. The laughter returned immediately, louder than before, and somewhere inside that chorus of children's voices, one voice finally spoke. Not laughing, speaking. Clear. Distinct, close enough to feel like someone was standing directly behind me. The voice said my full name, my first name, my middle name, my last name, every syllable, perfectly. The box slipped from my hands and hit the floor. For a second, I couldn't breathe. Nobody at work knew my middle name. Most of my friends barely remembered it. Yet something inside an empty store had just spoken it as clearly as if it were reading it from a file. I turned around so quickly my flashlight beam spun across the walls. Nothing. Nobody, only darkness, only shelves, only silence. And for the first time since taking that security job, I felt genuine fear. Not nervousness, not anxiety, fear. The kind of fear that bypasses logic entirely. The kind that reaches into the oldest parts of your brain and tells you one thing. Run. Run. That was the only thought left in my head. Not investigate, not think, not be brave. Just run. I wish I could tell you I handled the situation like a professional. I was supposed to be security after all. The guy people called when something strange happened. The guy who was supposed to stay calm. The guy who was supposed to walk toward problems, not away from them. Instead, I turned and got out of that store as fast as I could. I didn't sprint immediately. At least, that's what I tell myself. For the first few seconds, I walked quickly. Very quickly. The kind of walk people use when they're trying to convince themselves they're not scared. But the moment I reached the stockroom entrance, something happened. A noise. A sound. I still don't know what it was. Maybe footsteps. Maybe laughter. Maybe nothing at all. Whatever it was, panic finally won. I broke into a run. The service corridor seemed twice as long as usual. My flashlight beam bounced wildly off concrete walls. Every shadow looked alive. Every doorway looked occupied. I kept expecting to hear footsteps behind me. Tiny footsteps. Children's footsteps. The thought alone made me run fast. By the time I reached the security office, I was breathing hard. My heart felt like it was trying to punch its way out of my chest. I slammed the door shut, locked it, then checked the lock again and again. I don't know why. A lock suddenly felt very important. The office was brightly lit, ordinary, safe. Just 4 walls and a bank of monitors. For the first time in several minutes, I felt something resembling control return. Not much. Just enough to function. I sat down in front of the camera system. My hands were still shaking. I pulled up the shoe store feeds immediately. If somebody had been inside the store, the cameras would show it. If kids had somehow broken in, the cameras would show it. If I'd imagined everything, the cameras would show that too. Either way, I needed answers. The footage loaded. I started reviewing it. The timestamp rolled backward. 3 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. I found the moment I'd entered the store. There I was. Walking down the aisle, flashlight in hand, looking completely normal, at first. Then things got strange. On the screen, I suddenly stopped, turned, looked around, spun toward empty shelves, then started moving from aisle to aisle, searching, listening, reacting to things that weren't there. The camera showed exactly what I'd seen in the vacant store a few nights earlier. Nothing. No children, no intruders, no shadows, no dark figure, only me. Walking around an empty store, the footage looked ridiculous. Honestly, it looked worse than ridiculous. It looked unstable, like the recording of someone having a nervous breakdown. I rewound it, watched again, same result, nothing. I skipped ahead to where I'd seen the silhouette, the place where the child-sized figure had waved. The aisle appeared completely empty, not partially empty, completely empty, no movement, no shadow, nothing at all. A knot formed in my stomach, because that left me with only 2 possibilities. Either something impossible had happened, or I was losing my mind. Neither explanation felt particularly comforting. Then I reached the point where I'd run. The footage showed me practically bolting out of the aisle, looking over my shoulder, spinning around, acting like someone was chasing me. Yet the camera showed absolutely nobody behind me. I sat there staring at the monitor. The office felt unusually quiet. The humming of electronics seemed louder than normal. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Outside, the shopping center remained dark and empty. I suddenly became aware of how isolated I was. One man, alone, at 3 in the morning, watching footage that made him question his own sanity. I don't know how long I sat there, maybe 15 minutes, maybe 30. At some point, exhaustion took over, not enough to make me sleep, just enough to dull the sharpest edges of the fear. I finished the shift, barely. Every patrol felt different afterward. Every reflection caught my attention. Every distant noise made me stop and listen. I found myself glancing into empty stores longer than necessary, checking dark corners twice, sometimes 3 times. Morning couldn't arrive fast enough. When the sky finally began turning gray outside, I felt relief. Not because daylight made me feel safer, because daylight meant other people would arrive. Other voices, other witnesses, the illusion of normal life. Around 6 o'clock, my supervisor showed up. Her name was Denise. She'd been managing the property for years, mid-50s, practical, sharp, the kind of woman who could spot nonsense from a mile away. She wasn't rude, but she wasn't easily impressed either. When Denise walked into the office, she immediately noticed something was wrong. "Rough night?" she asked. I probably looked terrible. I hadn't slept well in weeks. My nerves were shot. And I was pretty sure I looked like I'd just seen a ghost. I hesitated, then decided to tell her, at least part of it. I explained the laughter, the empty store, the shadow, the voice. I even admitted hearing my full name. The entire time, Denise listened quietly. No interruptions, no jokes, no obvious skepticism, just listening. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she asked the question I'd been dreading. "Did you review the footage?" "Yeah, and?" I swallowed. There wasn't anything there. Her expression changed slightly, not dramatically, just enough. The look people get when they're trying to be polite while secretly reaching conclusions. The look that says maybe you're under too much stress, maybe you're exhausted, maybe you're imagining things. Denise pulled her chair closer to the monitor. "Show me." So I did. We watched the footage together, once, then again, then a third time. Every viewing made me feel worse, because every viewing reinforced the same reality. The camera supported none of my story, none of it. The child wasn't there. The shadow wasn't there. The laughter wasn't there. The figure that had spoken my name wasn't there. Only me, wandering through empty aisles, looking increasingly disturbed. When the video ended, Denise didn't say anything right away. She folded her arms, studied the monitor, then looked at me. I could practically see the concern forming behind her eyes. Not concern about intruders, concern about me. I opened my mouth to defend myself, to explain that I knew what I'd seen, that I wasn't making it up, that I wasn't crazy. Then Denise's gaze shifted, past me, toward the corner of the room. Her expression changed instantly. Not confusion, not concern, recognition. The kind that appears when somebody suddenly notices a problem, a real problem. "What's that?" she asked. My stomach dropped. I turned around and immediately understood. The shoebox. It was sitting beside my desk, plain as day, the same box I'd been carrying when everything happened. The same box I'd completely forgotten about. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence felt unbearable, because suddenly none of the paranormal stuff mattered. Not to Denise, not to the company, not to anyone else. All they would see was this. A security guard enters a store after hours, acts strangely, wanders around, then returns carrying merchandise. I could practically watch the pieces fall into place inside her head. The cameras hadn't captured ghosts, they had captured me, and the evidence was sitting 3 feet away. "Those yours?" Denise asked quietly. There are moments in life when a person realizes every possible answer is bad. This was one of them. If I said yes, I had to explain why. If I said no, I had to explain why they were in my office. Either way, the truth waited at the end of the conversation. I looked at the box, then at Denise, then back at the box. My mouth had gone completely dry. The silence stretched. 5 seconds, 10 seconds, maybe longer. Finally, Denise sighed, not angry, not yet, disappointed. Somehow that felt worse, a lot worse. Because anger is easier to face than disappointment. Anger passes. Disappointment lingers. The worst part was that she hadn't caught me through an investigation. She hadn't caught me through some brilliant detective work. I'd caught myself. My own greed had done it. My own stupidity. The same stupidity that had convinced me nobody was watching. The irony wasn't lost on me. Because if something truly had been following me through those stores, if something had been laughing in the darkness, if something had whispered my name, Then it had exposed me more effectively than any camera ever could. And sitting there in that office, staring at the forgotten shoebox, I experienced a strange realization. For the first time in months, maybe years, I wasn't thinking about the shadow child. I wasn't thinking about the laughter. I wasn't even thinking about the voice. I was thinking about guilt. Real guilt. The kind you can't explain away. The kind that settles deep inside your chest and refuses to leave. And somewhere in the back of my mind, a question quietly formed. What if this wasn't random? What if the things I'd been seeing weren't haunting the shopping center? What if they were haunting me? At the time, I dismissed the idea. I wanted a practical explanation. I wanted sleep deprivation, stress, anything rational. But deep down, a small part of me had already begun to suspect something much worse. Because the strange events weren't ending. They were only getting started. The week after Denise found the shoebox was one of the longest weeks of my life. Not because anything dramatic happened right away. Actually, that's what made it worse. Life kept pretending to be normal. Every evening I'd stop at the same gas station before work. The same cashier would ask how my night was going. The same coffee machine would be out of one flavor and overfilled with another. People would stand in line buying lottery tickets and energy drinks and cigarettes. Normal people living normal lives. Meanwhile, I was walking around feeling like there was a crack forming somewhere inside my head. Denise never formally accused me of anything. At least not immediately. That surprised me. Honestly, I expected to be fired the next day. Instead, she gave me a warning. A conversation. One of those uncomfortable conversations where somebody is trying to give you a chance to tell the truth without forcing you to tell the truth. I didn't take the opportunity. Looking back, I should have. Maybe things would have turned out differently. Maybe not. Either way, I kept showing up for work. And every night I told myself the same thing. Just get through the shift. Just finish 8 hours. Go home. Sleep. Repeat. Simple. The problem was that the shopping center no longer felt simple. Once you start noticing something strange, it's hard to stop looking for it. A creak becomes suspicious. A shadow becomes suspicious. A noise you would have ignored a month earlier suddenly feels important. I spent most of those shifts arguing with myself. One side insisted I was exhausted. The other side reminded me that exhaustion usually doesn't know your middle name. Around 3 nights after the incident in the shoe store, I was making my rounds behind the restaurants when I heard whispering for the first time. At least I thought I did. The dumpsters were lined up behind a steakhouse. The smell back there was awful, old grease, rotting food, wet cardboard, the kind of smell that sticks to your clothes. I was checking a service door when I thought I heard someone talking. Not loudly, just barely. Like 2 people standing around a corner having a private conversation. I stopped and listened. Nothing. I checked the alley, nobody. The sound disappeared so quickly I convinced myself I'd imagined it. Then it happened again, a few words, too faint to understand. I turned around so fast I nearly slipped on wet pavement. Still nothing, no employees, no customers, no homeless person hiding behind the dumpsters. Nope. I stood there for maybe 30 seconds. Eventually I shook my head and continued walking. The whole thing seemed ridiculous, but as I walked away, I could have sworn I heard another whisper behind me. Not beside me, not ahead of me, behind me. Close enough that I instinctively turned around. The alley was empty. The only thing moving was a plastic bag blowing across the pavement. I laughed at myself. Not because anything was funny. Because sometimes laughing feels better than admitting you're scared. The whispers continued throughout the week. Never long enough to investigate. Never clear enough to understand. Just brief fragments, tiny pieces of conversation that vanished whenever I focused on them. The strangest part was that they always seemed connected to reflections. I didn't notice the pattern immediately. One night I caught movement in the reflection of a storefront window. I spun around expecting to see someone behind me. Nobody. When I looked back at the glass, the movement was gone. Another night I saw something in the reflection of a microwave door inside a break room. Again, gone before I could identify it. Then there was the incident with the security office window. That one bothered me for a long time. The office had a narrow window facing the service road. Most nights there wasn't much to see. A few parked trucks, delivery vehicles, occasionally a raccoon digging through trash. Around 2 in the morning, I looked up from paperwork and noticed movement outside. Not directly outside, in the reflection. For a split second, I thought someone was standing behind me. A small shape, short, motionless. The kind of thing your brain notices before you consciously process it. I turned around immediately. The office was empty. Of course it was. I was alone. I knew I was alone. Still, my heart was racing. When I looked back at the window, the reflection appeared normal. Just my desk, my chair. The coffee maker nobody cleaned properly. Nothing else. I remember sitting there afterward trying to convince myself it was stress. That's the explanation I kept returning to. Stress. Stress can do amazing things. Stress can create patterns where none exist. Stress can turn shadows into people. Stress can make ordinary sounds seem threatening. The problem was that every rational explanation only worked until the next incident happened. Then I'd be right back where I started, questioning everything. One night I was reviewing camera feeds when I noticed something strange near the edge of a screen. At first, I thought it was a technical issue. Maybe a shadow, maybe a glitch. The camera overlooked a corridor behind the electronics store. The image quality wasn't great. A lot of those cameras were old. The figure appeared for less than a second, just standing near the edge of the frame. Small, dark, almost hidden. I leaned. The image disappeared. I rewound the footage. Nothing. I checked again. Still nothing. I told myself I'd misinterpreted a shadow. 5 minutes later, it happened on a different camera. A glimpse, a shape, a dark silhouette near the edge of the image. Gone before I could focus on it. That was the beginning. After that, I started seeing them more often. Never clearly, never for long. Always at the edge. The corner of a monitor. The reflection in a window. The far end of an aisle. Like something was staying deliberately outside my field of vision. A week earlier, I would have laughed at that sentence. Now I was living it. The worst part wasn't fear. The worst part was uncertainty. Fear at least gives you something concrete. A threat. A danger. Uncertainty just sits there, eating away at you. Every shift became a battle between what I knew and what I thought I knew. I knew the cameras showed nothing. I knew there was no evidence. I knew I was sleeping poorly. I knew guilt was weighing on me. But I also knew I'd seen things, or thought I'd seen things, and after a while, those become difficult to separate. By the end of the week, I had developed a habit. A stupid habit. Every time I passed a reflective surface, I checked it. Store windows, glass doors, mirrors in employee bathrooms. Anything reflective. I wasn't looking at myself. I was looking behind myself, just in case. One night I caught my reflection doing exactly that and felt embarrassed. A grown man checking mirrors like a frightened child. The realization should have snapped me out of it. Instead, it made me feel worse. Because now I knew I was changing. The job wasn't just scaring me, it was getting inside my head. Then came the night that changed everything. I was sitting in the security office around 4 in the morning, maybe a little after. The exact time escapes me. I remember being tired, the kind of tired that settles behind your eyes. The coffee had gone cold hours earlier. A half-finished report sat on the desk. Nothing unusual, just another quiet shift. Outside, rain tapped softly against the building. Not a storm, just enough rain to make everything feel lonely. I was staring at the monitors without really paying attention when every screen flickered. Once, that's all. Less than a second. A tiny electrical hiccup. The kind of thing that happens with old equipment. At least that's what I thought at first. Then I realized what I'd seen. Every monitor had displayed the same image, not the same camera angle, the same image. For that brief instant, every screen in the room showed a single child-sized figure. Standing motionless, facing forward, watching. The image vanished immediately. The normal camera feeds returned, parking lots, hallways, loading docks, everything exactly as it should have been. I sat there frozen, my hands resting on the keyboard, my pulse suddenly loud in my ears. Maybe I'd imagined it. That was my first thought. I was tired, overworked, anxious. Maybe my brain had stitched something together that wasn't really there. So I checked the recordings, every camera. One by one, I reviewed the exact moment. Nothing, no flicker, no child, no interruption. The footage remained perfectly normal. The monitors had shown me something that apparently never existed. I replayed the recordings over and over. Same result, nothing. By the time dawn arrived, I had stopped looking for answers. I was looking for reassurance, for proof that I wasn't losing my mind. But deep down, another feeling had started taking root. A feeling I didn't want to acknowledge, because it sounded insane. The figure wasn't appearing randomly. It wasn't just showing up in stores, or reflections, or camera screens. It felt like it was getting closer, and for the first time, I started wondering whether all those moments I'd dismissed as paranoia were actually leading somewhere. Toward something. Toward someone, toward me. After the incident with the monitors, something changed. Not in the shopping center. In me. That's the best way I can explain it. Up until that point, I'd still been fighting for a rational explanation. I wasn't winning the argument, but I was still fighting it. After seeing that figure appear across every screen at the same time, that fight became harder, much harder. The strange thing is that life outside of work remained completely normal. That's what made the whole experience so confusing. I'd leave my shift in the morning and stop at the diner a few miles from the plaza. Same waitress, same coffee, same old men sitting at the counter talking about weather and football. The world kept behaving exactly the way it always had. Nothing supernatural happened in daylight. Nothing followed me home. Nothing appeared in mirrors. Nothing whispered my name. The moment I left work, everything felt normal again. At first that comforted me. Eventually it started bothering me, because it made me question myself. Maybe it really was all in my head. Maybe the overnight shifts were finally catching up with me. Maybe guilt over the thefts had created some elaborate psychological punishment. The human mind can do strange things. At least that's what I kept reading online at 3 in the morning when I couldn't sleep. Sleep had become a problem by then. Not because I was afraid to go to bed, because every time I closed my eyes, my brain replayed the same images. The empty aisle, the silhouette, the waving hand, the monitors. I started sleeping in short stretches, 2 hours here, 3 hours there, never enough, never restful. I'd wake up feeling exhausted, then drag myself back to work and repeat the cycle. The lack of sleep made everything worse. I became jumpy. I started snapping at people. Small things irritated me. One afternoon, I nearly got into an argument with a cashier because she accidentally gave me the wrong change. That wasn't who I normally was, or at least who I wanted to believe I was. I could feel myself becoming someone else, someone tense, someone suspicious, someone constantly waiting for the next strange thing to happen, and eventually it did. The whispers returned, only now they were becoming clearer. Not clear enough to understand, just clearer. Like a radio station slowly moving into range. I would hear them during patrols, near loading docks, inside vacant stores, always multiple voices, always overlapping. Sometimes it sounded like a crowd holding a conversation just beyond a closed door. Other times it sounded like people speaking directly into my ear from opposite directions. Whenever I stopped to listen, the words slipped away, the voices would soften, fade, disappear. One night I actually recorded audio on my phone. I was determined to prove I wasn't imagining things. I stood in a service corridor for nearly 5 minutes while the whispering continued around me. I remember feeling relieved. Finally, proof. When I played the recording back later, there was nothing. Not silence, just normal background noise. Air vents, distant traffic. The sound of my own breathing, no voices, no whispers, nothing. I sat in the security office listening to that recording over and over. The same sinking feeling returned. Either something impossible was happening, or I was the only person experiencing it. Neither possibility felt good. Around that same time, Denise started paying closer attention to me. She never said it directly, but I could tell. Managers notice things. It's part of their job. She noticed the dark circles under my eyes, the extra coffee, the way I'd stare at monitors longer than necessary, the way I'd sometimes stop in the middle of conversations because I thought I'd heard something. One morning she asked if I was sleeping. I lied, told her I was fine. She didn't believe me. I could see it in her face. The conversation ended there, but the concern remained. A few nights later, I experienced something that bothered me more than anything before it. Not because it was frightening, because it felt personal. I was reviewing camera footage from one of the rear corridors. Completely routine, nothing unusual. Then I noticed a figure standing near the edge of the frame, a small dark shape. I leaned closer. The figure vanished. That part wasn't unusual anymore. I'd seen that happen several times. What bothered me was what happened next. As I sat back in my chair, I caught movement in the reflection of the monitor. Not on the screen. Behind me. I turned instantly. Nobody. The office was empty. But my coffee cup had tipped over, just slightly. Enough for coffee to spill across the desk. I know how ridiculous that sounds. Maybe I bumped it. Maybe my elbow hit the desk. Maybe there was a perfectly ordinary explanation. But I remember staring at that puddle of coffee and feeling genuinely shaken. Because for the first time, it felt like whatever was happening wasn't staying inside the stores anymore. It felt closer. The following week was worse. Every shift seemed heavier than the one before. The shopping center felt different after midnight. Not physically, emotionally. It's difficult to explain. The same buildings were there, the same signs, the same empty parking lot. Yet everything felt slightly wrong. Like walking through a familiar house after someone rearranges all the furniture. You recognize everything, but something feels off. One Thursday night, rain covered most of the property. The parking lot reflected the glow of store signs. Water dripped from awnings. The whole plaza looked deserted. I remember thinking it might finally be a quiet night. I should have known better. At approximately 3 o'clock in the morning, an alarm notification appeared on my monitor. Motion detected, electronics store. At first, I wasn't concerned. False alarms happened all the time. Banners moved, signs shifted, sensors malfunctioned. Most alerts turned out to be nothing. Still, procedure required a physical inspection. I grabbed my flashlight, signed out on the patrol log, and headed toward the store. The rain had mostly stopped by then. Only a light drizzle remained. The electronics store sat near the far end of the shopping center, larger than most of the other businesses, the kind of place that sold televisions, computers, gaming systems, appliances, and anything else with a power cord. From outside, everything appeared normal. No broken glass, no damaged locks, no obvious signs of entry. Part of me felt relieved. Maybe this really would be a routine check. Maybe for once nothing strange was waiting inside. I unlocked the service entrance, stepped into the stock corridor, and immediately heard whispering. I froze. My stomach dropped, because I recognized the sound instantly. The same voices, the same overlapping conversations. Only this time there were more of them. Far more. The corridor seemed full of whispers, hundreds of words spoken simultaneously. Too quiet to understand, too loud to ignore. I stood there listening, trying to identify a source, trying to determine whether the sound was coming from a speaker, a television, a radio, anything. Instead, it seemed to come from everywhere. The walls, the ceiling, the darkness ahead. The whispering grew louder as I moved deeper into the building. Not dramatically, gradually. Enough to make me uncomfortable, then enough to make me nervous, then enough to make me seriously consider turning around. But I didn't. Partly because it was my job. Partly because I was tired of running. I followed the sound through the store, past computer displays, past appliance sections, past rows of dark television screens. The farther I walked, the louder the voices became, until it sounded like dozens of people speaking directly beside me. Then something happened. Every whisper stopped, all at once. The silence hit so suddenly that I nearly stumbled. 1 second there was noise. The next there was nothing. Not a single voice, not a single sound. And standing in that silence, surrounded by rows of dark television screens, I felt a knot tighten in my chest. Because deep down, I already knew something was about to happen. And for the first time since this whole nightmare began, I wasn't wondering if I was imagining it. I was wondering whether I was too late to leave. I should have turned around. That's the thought I've come back to more times than I can count. Not because I think it would have changed anything. Honestly, I don't know if it would have. But standing there in that electronics store, surrounded by darkness and silence, every instinct I had was telling me to leave. The problem was that I had spent weeks second-guessing my own instincts. Weeks telling myself I was tired. Weeks convincing myself I was stressed. Weeks explaining away things that didn't make sense. After a while, you stop trusting your own judgment. You stop knowing which fears deserve your attention and which ones belong in your imagination. So instead of leaving, I stayed. I stood there listening to the silence, waiting. The store seemed unusually dark, not pitch black. There were still emergency lights glowing faintly near the exits. A few LEDs blinked on display equipment. But the darkness felt heavier than it should have, like the building was holding its breath. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then I heard a click, sharp, mechanical, somewhere ahead of me. A television powering on. Another click followed, then another, then another. The sound spread through the store. 1 television, 5 televisions, 10, 20. Within seconds, the entire electronics section erupted with the rapid clicking of screens coming to life. The sudden light nearly blinded me. Rows and rows of televisions illuminated the darkness. Large screens, small screens, wall displays, demo units. Every one of them activated at the same time. I remember actually taking a step backward, not because the televisions turned on, because of what they were showing. At first, I thought it was a security feed. That would have been strange enough. Then I realized what I was looking at. Every screen displayed the exact same image. A live camera view, not of the parking lot, not of the entrance, not of the store. Of me, standing in the television section, holding a flashlight, frozen in place. For a moment, my brain struggled to process it. The angle was wrong. The camera seemed to be positioned somewhere behind me, slightly above shoulder height, as if someone were standing a few feet away filming me. I turned around instinctively. Nothing, only dark aisles, rows of merchandise, empty floor space, no cameras, no people, nobody holding anything. When I looked back at the screens, the image remained unchanged. Me, standing there, staring, the flashlight hanging uselessly in my hand. I don't know how long I watched. Maybe 2 seconds, maybe 10. Fear distorts time. Everything felt stretched and distant. Then I noticed something moving on one of the screens. At first I thought it was interference, a glitch, something in the background. I leaned closer. The movement became clearer. A figure, small, child-sized, standing several feet behind me. My stomach immediately dropped. The figure wasn't alone. There was another one. And another. And another. I counted 6 before I stopped. Maybe there were more. It's hard to say now. The memory feels fragmented, like a photograph that keeps fading every time I look at it. What I remember clearly is this. They weren't standing beside me. They weren't approaching. They were simply watching. 6 small figures, completely motionless, arranged in a loose line behind me. The way people stand before a family photo. The way an audience watches a performance. The way predators watch wounded animals. I spun around immediately. Nothing. The aisle behind me was empty. Completely empty. No children, no shadows, no movement. Only darkness. I swept my flashlight across the floor, across shelves, across display stands, nothing. The store appeared deserted. I looked back at the televisions. The figures were still there, every one of them, standing exactly where they'd been before, watching me. The sight hit me harder than seeing the first shadow child, because this time there wasn't just one, and because the screens weren't showing a recording. The feed was live. When I moved, the image moved. When I turned my head, the image turned. Everything happened in real time. Except for the figures. They never moved at all. Not once. I remember feeling a strange sensation then. Not panic. Not yet. Something worse. The feeling you get when reality begins slipping away from you. The feeling that comes when you can no longer determine which version of events is real. My eyes shifted from the televisions to the empty store behind me. Then back to the televisions. Then back again. One reality showed empty space. The other showed 6 silent observers. Neither one made sense. The whispering returned, softly at first, barely audible. The voices seemed to come from the television speakers, hundreds of whisper overlapping one another. The sound reminded me of people talking inside a church before a funeral begins. Low, constant, unsettling. I took another step backward. The figures remained still. The whispering grew louder. My pulse was pounding so hard I could hear it. I remember trying to tell myself to leave. Just leave. Walk away. Get out. Instead, I found myself staring at the screens, searching for details, trying to understand what I was seeing. That's when I noticed something else. The figures weren't completely black anymore, not like before, not like the silhouettes I'd seen in reflections. These looked darker than the surrounding image, but there were details now, faint details, enough to make out shapes, arms, legs, heads, the outline of clothing, and faces. Or what should have been faces. My breath caught in my throat. Because the faces didn't look right. The features seemed wrong somehow. Distorted. Incomplete. Like someone trying to draw a human face from memory and getting most of it wrong. The eyes appeared too dark, the mouths slightly too wide. Nothing dramatic, nothing exaggerated. Just enough to trigger the part of your brain that recognizes when something isn't human, no matter how hard it's trying to look that way. One of the figures tilted its head, very slowly. The movement was subtle, but unmistakable. The first movement I'd ever seen from any of them. A chill raced through my entire body. The whispering suddenly stopped. Every television went silent. The store went silent. Everything stopped. At exactly the same moment, then every screen flickered, once, twice, 3 times. The image distorted. Horizontal lines rolled across the displays. The feed trembled, and for a fraction of a second I saw something standing much closer behind me. Not 6 figures. One, tall, far taller. Its head nearly touched the top of the camera frame. I only saw it for an instant. An impossible shape, long limbs, a pale face. A smile stretched far wider than any smile should have been. Then the image snapped back. Gone. The child-sized figures remained. The tall figure disappeared. But the damage had already been done. I had seen it, and deep down I knew it had wanted me to. The overhead lights immediately shut off, every single one. The televisions died at the same time. The room plunged into darkness, complete darkness. Not the soft darkness of nighttime. The kind of darkness that feels physical, heavy, smothering. My flashlight slipped from my hand. It hit the floor with a loud crack. The beam spun wildly across the ceiling before settling somewhere behind a display shelf. The light still worked, barely. A weak cone of illumination stretched across the floor. For 1 second, everything was silent. Absolutely silent. Then I felt it. Warm breath. Against the back of my neck. So close that every muscle in my body locked up. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't think. A voice spoke directly behind me, not loud, not angry. Just above a whisper. One word, a single word spoken with absolute certainty. Thief. The voice knew exactly who I was, and somehow that terrified me more than everything else combined. The second that word hit my ear, whatever composure I had left disappeared. Gone. Not gradually. Not piece by piece. Gone all at once. People like to imagine they'll react a certain way when they're terrified. They picture themselves staying calm, thinking clearly, making smart decisions. The truth is, fear doesn't care who you think you are. Real fear strips everything away. Training, pride, common sense, all of it. And standing in that dark electronics store, with something breathing on the back of my neck and calling me by exactly what I was, I completely lost control. I ran. I didn't turn around. I didn't shine the flashlight behind me. I didn't try to see what had spoken. To this day, I've never looked back. Part of me doesn't want to know. The weak beam from my flashlight bounced wildly across the floor as I sprinted. The store was almost completely dark. I could barely see where I was going. I slammed into the end of a display almost immediately. The impact knocked the air from my lungs. Boxes crashed to the floor. Something made of glass shattered nearby. I stumbled, caught myself, and kept moving. Behind me, I thought I heard movement. Not footsteps exactly. More like multiple things moving at once. Quick, chaotic. Like a crowd rushing forward. I never stopped long enough to find out. My shoulder clipped a stack of box printers. They toppled over like dominoes. The crash echoed through the building. For a split second, I considered stopping. The old part of my brain, the security guard part, wanted to. Property damage. Incident reports. Company procedures. Then another thought immediately crushed it. Forget the paperwork. Get out. I kept running. The store seemed endless. Easels stretched into darkness. Shelves appeared out of nowhere. Every few steps, I crashed into something else. At one point, I slipped on a fallen display sign and nearly went down completely. The only thing keeping me upright was pure adrenaline. The strange thing about adrenaline is that it narrows your world. You stop thinking about tomorrow. You stop thinking about consequences. Your entire existence shrinks down to a single objective. Escape. Nothing else matters. Not your dignity, not your job, not your future. Just the next step, and then the next, and then the next. I finally spotted the glow of the service corridor ahead. The sight almost made me cry from relief. I burst through the doorway so fast I nearly hit the wall opposite it. The corridor lights seemed blinding after the darkness of the sales floor. For the first time since entering the store, I risked a glance backward. The doorway stood empty. No figures, no shadows, nothing chasing me, yet somehow that didn't help. Because I could still feel that voice in my head. Thief, one word, one simple word. And somehow it carried more weight than any threat. I ran the entire length of the corridor. My radio bounced against my hip. My breathing sounded ragged and uneven. By the time I reached the security office, my chest felt like it was on fire. I slammed the door behind me, locked it, then immediately checked the lock again, then a third time. Only after I was absolutely certain the door was secure did I collapse into the chair. For several minutes I couldn't do anything except breathe. The office looked exactly the same as it always had. The monitors, the desk, the filing cabinet, the cheap clock hanging on the wall, normal things, ordinary things. I stared at them like they belonged to another world. My shirt was soaked with sweat. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. At some point I noticed I'd scraped the skin off one of my palms during the fall. Blood had smeared across my fingers. I didn't even remember getting hurt. The monitors continued showing normal camera feeds. Parking lots, hallways, store entrances. Nothing unusual. No children, no shadows, no smiling faces. Part of me wanted to pull up the electronic store cameras. Part of me wanted proof. Another part wanted absolutely nothing to do with that store ever again. The second part won. I never checked. Not that night. Maybe that was cowardly. Maybe it was self-preservation. I'm still not sure. The remainder of the shift passed in a blur. I stayed inside the office almost the entire time. Every little noise made me flinch. Every radio transmission startled me. I kept looking toward the office door, waiting. For what? I didn't know. Nothing happened. No whispers, no laughter, no movement on the monitors. The shopping center appeared perfectly normal, which somehow felt worse, because normality made me question everything all over again. Had it happened? Had I imagined it? Had exhaustion finally pushed me over the edge? Then I would remember the breath on my neck, and the certainty would return. Something had been there. Whether it was supernatural, psychological, or something else entirely, I couldn't say. But something had happened. The sky was beginning to brighten when Denise arrived. I remember hearing her keys before I saw her. The sound carried down the hallway. Ordinarily, it would have been comforting. That morning, it just made me realize how exhausted I was. She walked into the office carrying a coffee cup and a folder under one arm. Then she stopped. "Jesus," she said. "You look awful." She wasn't wrong. I hadn't slept properly in weeks, and after the previous night, I doubt I looked human. I must have stared at her for several seconds before answering. Finally, I said, "I'm done." She frowned. "What do you mean? I'm quitting." The words came out before I'd fully thought them through, but the moment I said them, I knew they were true. No hesitation, no uncertainty. Done, finished, over. Denise set the folder down. For a moment, she studied me carefully, not judging, just looking, trying to figure out what had happened. What happened last night? I considered telling her. The televisions, the figures, the voice, all of it. But I already knew how it would sound. I'd heard myself describe simpler incidents before. Every story sounded crazier than the last, and there was never any evidence, never anything tangible, just me. So I shook my head. "Doesn't matter, it clearly matters," I laughed. Not because anything was funny, because I was exhausted. The kind of laugh people make when they're running out of energy. I can't do this anymore. The room went quiet. Denise sat down across from me. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she sighed, a long, tired sigh, the kind managers develop after years of dealing with problems they can't fix. "You sure?" I nodded. She looked down at the desk, then back at me, and for just a moment, I thought I saw relief in her expression. Not happiness, relief, like she'd been expecting this conversation, like she'd been waiting for it. That realization stung more than I cared to admit, because it confirmed something I'd already suspected. She thought something was wrong with me. Maybe she was right. Maybe there was. The resignation itself took less than 10 minutes. A few signatures, a few forms. Nothing dramatic, no arguments, no attempts to convince me to stay. When I finished, Denise collected the paperwork and placed it in the folder. Then she looked at me again. This time her voice softened. "Get some sleep." Simple advice, ordinary advice. Yet I remember it more clearly than almost anything else from that morning, because she genuinely sounded concerned. Not angry, not disappointed. Concerned. I thanked her, grabbed my things, and walked out. The parking lot was quiet. The early morning sun had started pushing through the clouds. People were beginning to arrive for work. Store managers, delivery drivers, employees carrying coffee cups. Normal life continuing exactly as it always had. I sat in my car for a long time before starting the engine. Long enough for the windshield to fog slightly. Long enough for my thoughts to catch up with me. Part of me felt relieved I was leaving. No more overnight shifts, no more empty stores, no more whispers, no more shadows, no more laughter. Another part of me felt ashamed, because beneath all the fear was a simpler truth. The thing had been right. Whatever had whispered that word into my ear hadn't exposed some secret nobody knew. It had simply named me accurately. I was a thief, and somewhere between the stolen shoes, the missing electronics, and all the excuses I'd been feeding myself, I'd forgotten how ugly that word actually sounded. The drive home should have felt like freedom. Instead, it felt like an ending. And at the time, I honestly believed it was. I thought the shopping center was behind me. I thought the voices were behind me. I thought the shadow figures were behind me. I thought all of it was over. I couldn't have been more wrong. The first few days after quitting felt strange, not scary, just strange. For nearly 2 years, my life had revolved around a schedule that most people never experience. I'd been sleeping through afternoons, working through the night, eating meals at odd hours, living in a world that existed while everyone else was asleep. Then suddenly it was gone. No alarm clock set for evening, no security uniform hanging by the door, no long drives to the shopping center. Nothing. The first morning after I quit, I got home just after sunrise. I remember sitting on the edge of my bed, still wearing half my uniform, staring at the wall. The apartment was quiet. The neighbors were leaving for work. I could hear car doors closing outside. Dogs barking, the ordinary sounds of daytime life. For the first time in months, I should have felt relieved. Instead, I felt empty, like I'd walked away from something unfinished. I eventually slept for nearly 12 hours, the longest uninterrupted sleep I'd had in a very long time. When I woke up, the silence in my apartment felt different, comfortable, normal. No whispers, no laughter, no shadows waiting in reflections, just silence. Real silence. The kind I'd been missing without realizing it. Over the next few weeks, life slowly settled into something resembling routine again. I started looking for work, filled out applications, attended interviews, tried to act like a normal person. The problem was that I wasn't entirely sure I felt normal anymore. The shopping center stayed in my head, not constantly, but often enough. A memory would surface while I was eating lunch, or standing in line somewhere, or lying in bed. I'd suddenly remember the dark figure waving from the end of the aisle, or the monitors flickering, or that voice speaking my full name. The memories never stayed long, but they always left something behind, a lingering discomfort, a question without an answer. About 3 weeks after I quit, I received a phone call from someone I used to work with. Not Denise, another guard, a guy named Mark. We weren't particularly close, the kind of coworker you chat with during shift changes but never see outside of work. At first, the conversation was completely normal. He asked how I was doing. I asked how things were going at the plaza, small talk. Nothing important. Then his tone changed. "You hear about the inventory investigation?" My stomach tightened immediately. Not because I was surprised, because I'd been expecting it. Deep down, I'd known it was coming. Stores don't lose merchandise forever. Eventually, someone starts asking questions. I tried to sound casual. "What investigation?" Mark lowered his voice slightly, asking around about missing inventory. I didn't respond. He continued. "Apparently, it's more than they thought." I stared out the apartment window while he talked. Cars moved through the parking lot below. People walked dogs, kids rode bicycles, normal life. Meanwhile, my pulse had started climbing. "How much?" I asked. "I don't know exactly." A pause. "Enough." That single word sat heavily in my stomach. Enough. Over 6 months, I'd convinced myself the thefts were insignificant. A pair of shoes, a hoodie, some electronics. Small things. Nothing major. At least that's what I told myself. The human mind is remarkably talented at minimizing its own mistakes, especially when those mistakes happen gradually. One bad decision becomes another, then another, and eventually you've built a habit around something you once would have condemned. Listening to Mark talk, I realized how thoroughly I'd lied to myself. The losses hadn't been small. Not when added together, not over months, not across multiple stores. The total mattered, and for the first time I genuinely wondered what would have happened if I'd never quit. How long would I have kept going? Another month? 6 months? A year? I didn't like the answer that came to mind. The conversation ended a few minutes later. I thanked him for calling, then sat quietly in my apartment for a long time afterward, thinking, remembering, regretting. A few days later, I learned more. Not directly. People talk. Former employees talk even more. Word traveled quickly. Several stores had reported inventory shortages. Management had begun reviewing records, security logs, shipment reports, camera footage, everything. The investigation spread across multiple businesses in the plaza. Apparently, nobody could determine exactly where the losses were coming from. Some blamed bookkeeping mistakes. Others blamed employees. Some thought organized theft might be involved. The theories varied, the uncertainty didn't. I remember sitting at my kitchen table one evening, staring at a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold, doing math, trying to estimate how much I'd actually taken. The number kept growing. Every time I thought I'd remembered everything, another item surfaced, another theft, another excuse I'd made for myself. By the end, I stopped counting. The result was too embarrassing, too ugly, too honest. The strange thing was that despite everything, nobody ever contacted me. No police, no investigators, no lawyers, nothing. Weeks passed, then months, still nothing. At first, that relieved me. Eventually, it started making me nervous. Every unexpected phone call caught my attention. Every unfamiliar number made my stomach tighten. I kept waiting for consequences to arrive, for someone to knock on the door, for someone to ask questions. The knock never came. The questions never arrived. Somehow, through a combination of luck, incompetence, timing, or pure chance, I slipped through the cracks. To this day, I don't fully understand how. Maybe there wasn't enough evidence. Maybe the losses were spread across too many stores. Maybe management didn't want the publicity. Whatever the reason, I escaped. Legally, anyway. Mentally was another story, because the investigation wasn't the thing keeping me awake. The investigation made sense. Missing merchandise leads to questions. Questions lead to investigations. That's normal. What didn't make sense were the things I'd seen. The things I'd heard. Those remained. Long after the job disappeared. Long after the fear should have faded. I spent months trying to build a rational explanation. Sometimes I'd sit awake at night mentally reconstructing every incident, like a detective investigating his own memories. The laughter, maybe exhaustion. The whispers, stress. The figures, poor lighting. The voice, auditory hallucination. One by one I'd assign explanations. One by one I'd file them away. For a few minutes the theory would feel solid, comforting even. Then I'd remember something that didn't fit, something that refused to stay inside the explanation. The voice saying my full name, the television screens, the synchronized image across every monitor, the timing of everything, and suddenly the theory would start falling apart again. I became trapped in a cycle. Build an F to find a flaw, start over, repeat, over and over. One night I actually dug through old research online about sleep deprivation. I spent nearly 3 hours reading medical articles, hallucinations, paranoia, anxiety, visual distortions. The symptoms matched surprisingly well. For a while I felt relieved. Finally, evidence, proof. Maybe I'd solved it. Maybe the entire nightmare had been created by exhaustion and guilt working together. The explanation wasn't perfect, but it was close enough. Close enough to live with. Close enough to move on. That's the explanation I eventually chose. Not because I fully believed it, because I needed to believe something. Human beings don't do well with mysteries. We crave answers, even imperfect answers. Especially imperfect answers. An explanation doesn't have to be correct to be comforting. Eventually I found another job, a warehouse position about 40 minutes away. Long hours, decent pay. Nothing exciting. Exactly what I wanted. No overnight patrols, no empty stores, no security monitors, no dark hallways, just pallets, inventory sheets, forklifts, and people, lots of people. The normality felt wonderful. Months passed, then nearly a year. The memories faded, not completely but enough. I stopped checking reflections, stopped listening for whispers, stopped expecting laughter in empty rooms. Life moved forward, slowly, steadily. Exactly the way life is supposed to. And eventually I convinced myself that the shopping center belonged to the past. A strange chapter, an unpleasant chapter, but a finished chapter. I honestly believed that, for almost a year. Then one night, at exactly 3:07 in the morning, my phone rang, and everything started again. The first call happened on a Tuesday. I remember that because Tuesdays were usually my easiest day at the warehouse. Nothing special ever seemed to happen on Tuesdays. No major shipments, no inventory counts, no last-minute surprises, just another ordinary workday. I got home around 6 in the evening, ate dinner while watching a baseball game I barely paid attention to, and went to bed earlier than usual. The warehouse job was physically exhausting in a way security work never had been. By the time my head hit the pillow, I was out. No dreams. No tossing and turning, nothing. Then the phone rang. The sound ripped me out of sleep so violently that for a second I didn't know where I was. I reached blindly across the nightstand, knocked over a glass of water, swore. Finally grabbed the phone, the screen glowed in the darkness. 3:07 a.m., unknown caller. My first thought was family. My second thought was emergency. Nobody calls at 3 in the morning unless something has gone wrong. At least that's what most people assume. Half asleep, I answered immediately. Hello? I sat up in bed, still waking up, still trying to clear the fog from my head. Hello? Silence. Not static, not a bad connection. Just silence. The strange thing was that it didn't feel empty. It felt occupied, like somebody was there, listening, waiting. I held the phone against my ear for maybe 20 seconds. Then the call disconnected. No warning. No sound. Just ended. I stared at the screen. Unknown caller. No voicemail, no explanation. I remember checking the time again. 3:07. For some reason that detail stuck with me. Maybe because I'd spent so many months working nights. Maybe because unusual things seem more significant in the middle of the night. Either way, I eventually shrugged it off. Wrong number. Telemarketer. Drunk person dialing the wrong number. There were plenty of explanations. I plugged the phone back in and went back to sleep. The next day, I barely thought about it. Work was busy. A forklift broke down. Normal problems. Real problems. The kind that leave little room for dwelling on strange phone calls. By bedtime, I'd almost forgotten the whole thing. Then the phone rang again, 3:07 a.m. Exactly. Not 3:06. Not 3:837. The same unknown number. At least I assumed it was the same number. The display simply read unknown caller again. This time I wasn't half asleep when I answered. I was irritated more than anything. Hello, silence. The exact same silence. I waited, nothing. No breathing, no voice. No background noise. Just that strange sense that somebody was there, listening. After about 30 seconds, the call ended. Again, no explanation, no voicemail, nothing. I lay awake afterward, staring at the ceiling. The call itself wasn't frightening, at least not yet. It was annoying. That's the word I'd use. Annoying. The kind of thing that crawls under your skin because it makes no sense. The third night was when I started paying attention. Because the phone rang at exactly 3:07 again, 3 nights, same time, same silence, same unknown caller. Patterns change things. One strange event is easy to dismiss. 2 events raise questions. 3 events create a pattern. And patterns are harder to ignore. I answered, listened, waited, nothing. The call disconnected after roughly 20 seconds, just like before. The next morning, I contacted my phone company. The woman I spoke to sounded bored before I even finished explaining the problem. She suggested blocking the number. I explained there wasn't a visible number to block. She suggested changing settings. I tried, nothing helped. The calls continued night after night. Always 3-7. At first I kept answering, then I stopped. The result didn't matter. Answer or ignore, the call lasted roughly the same amount of time. 20 seconds, sometimes 30. Then it ended. The routine became strangely predictable. I'd wake up, see the glowing screen. 3:07. Unknown caller. Wait for it to stop, roll over. Try to sleep. Eventually, even the fear disappeared. Human beings adapt to almost anything. Given enough repetition, even bizarre experiences become routine. The calls became part of my life, like an unwanted alarm clock, a nuisance, nothing more. Or at least that's what I kept telling myself. Weeks passed, then nearly 2 months. Every single night, no exceptions. Not once did the caller speak. Not once did the pattern change. The consistency somehow made it worse. Random behavior is easier to explain. Consistent behavior suggests intention, and intention implies a person. I found myself wondering about that person. Who calls someone every night for months without speaking? What kind of person does that? What are they waiting for? The questions lingered. The answers never came. Then one Friday night, everything changed. I'd had an unusually rough week. Mandatory overtime, equipment problems, a supervisor who seemed determined to make everyone's life miserable. By the time I got home, I was exhausted. The kind of exhaustion that settles into your bones. I barely finished dinner before falling asleep on the couch. Eventually, I dragged myself to bed. The last thing I remember before falling asleep was hoping the phone wouldn't ring. Of course it did. 3:07. Exactly. I grabbed it without looking. More annoyed than anything else. This time I didn't say hello. I didn't speak at all. I simply held the phone to my ear and listened. For several seconds, there was nothing. Then I heard a sound. Faint. Very faint. So faint I almost thought I imagined it. A child laughing. My entire body went rigid. The sound was distant, as though it were coming from another room, or from the far end of a long hallway, but I recognized it immediately. There was no mistaking it. I'd spent months trying to forget that sound, months convincing myself it wasn't real. Yet the moment I heard it again, every memory came rushing back. The vacant store, the shoe aisle, the darkness, the shadows. The laughter grew slightly louder, not much, just enough to become unmistakable. One child, then another, then several more. The exact same playful laughter that had echoed through those empty stores. The exact same sound I'd spent nearly a year explaining away. My mouth had gone completely dry. I sat upright in bed, listening. The laughter continued. Soft, distant, almost cheerful, which somehow made it more disturbing. Then, for the briefest moment, I thought I heard footsteps. Small footsteps, running somewhere beyond the receiver. The sound lasted less than a second. The laughter stopped. The line went silent. And then the call disconnected. I remained sitting in bed long afterward. The room felt colder. The darkness felt different. Not because anything had changed. Because I had. The explanation I'd spent a year building had just developed a crack. A serious crack. Because sleep deprivation didn't make sense anymore. I wasn't working nights. I wasn't exhausted in the same way. I wasn't wandering empty stores at 3 in the morning. I was at home. In my own bed. Living a completely different life, and somehow that laughter had followed me. I didn't sleep again that night. Every little noise in the house kept drawing my attention. The refrigerator cycling on, the air conditioner humming, branches scraping lightly against the outside wall. Ordinary sounds. Yet none of them felt ordinary anymore, because one thought kept returning, again and again. A thought I desperately didn't want to entertain. What if whatever I'd experienced at the shopping center hadn't stayed there? What if it never had? And if that was true, why had it waited nearly a year to call? After that night, I expected the calls to get worse. That's usually how these stories go, isn't it? Something strange happens, then it escalates. Then it keeps escalating until everything falls apart. At least that's what I expected. Instead, the calls stopped, completely. The very next night, my phone never rang. I woke up around 4 in the morning and immediately checked the screen. No missed calls, no unknown number, nothing. I remember lying there for several minutes, almost disappointed. Not because I wanted the calls, because I had spent so much time preparing myself for them that their absence felt strange, like arriving at work and finding the building missing. The second night passed without a call too, then a week, then 2 weeks. Soon an entire month went by, nothing. No unknown number, no silence, no laughter, no interruptions at 3-7. Eventually I stopped checking, stopped waiting. Life slowly settled back into normal routines again. The warehouse stayed busy. Summer turned into fall. The days grew shorter, the mornings colder. I picked up extra shifts whenever they were available. Partly because I wanted the money. Partly because staying busy left less room for thinking. That strategy worked surprisingly well. Most nights I came home exhausted, ate dinner, watched television for an hour, then went to bed. Simple, predictable, normal. Exactly the kind of life I'd wanted after leaving security work. For a while, I even convinced myself that the phone calls had some ordinary explanation. Maybe somebody had been playing a prank. Maybe a telemarketing system malfunctioned. Maybe there was a technical issue I didn't understand. The human mind is incredibly creative when it's searching for comfort. Give it enough time and it'll build explanations for almost anything. Months passed. Then nearly 6. The shopping center began feeling distant. Not forgotten. I don't think I'll ever forget it. But distant. Like a bad dream you remember in pieces. Certain images remained sharp. Others faded. The fear itself became harder to access. Every now and then I'd think about the laughter, or the televisions, or the voice, but the memories no longer felt immediate. They felt old. And honestly, I was grateful for that. I wanted them to become old memories. I wanted them to stay there. One Friday evening, I met a few coworkers at a sports bar after work. Nothing unusual. A couple beers, some bad food. A baseball game playing on half a dozen screens. The kind of night millions of people have every day. I got home later than usual, close to midnight. The weather had turned cold. The first real cold spell of the season. I remember standing on the porch for a moment while searching for my keys. The neighborhood was quiet. Most of the houses were dark. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. Nothing about the night felt unusual. Nothing felt threatening. If you'd told me then what would happen a few hours later, I would have laughed. I would have thought you were insane. I went inside, locked the door, watched a little television, eventually went to bed, and slept. Deeply, the kind of sleep that comes after a long week. No dreams, no interruptions, nothing. Then I woke up, suddenly, completely awake. The way people sometimes do for no obvious reason. For a second, I didn't know why. The room was dark, silent. My phone sat charging on the nightstand. The house looked exactly as it always did. Yet something felt wrong, not dangerous. Wrong, like I'd forgotten something important. I reached for my phone. The screen illuminated the room. A notification was waiting. Motion detected. Front door camera. The timestamp made my stomach tighten immediately. 3:07 a.m. Exactly, I stared at those numbers for several seconds. Part of me already knew I wasn't going back to sleep. I opened the security app, the video loaded. At first, everything appeared normal. My front porch, the steps, the walkway leading to the driveway, nothing unusual. No visitors, no movement. The recording continued. 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 15. I remember thinking the camera must have been triggered by an animal. Maybe a cat, maybe a raccoon. Then something moved, barely, at the far right edge of the frame. For a moment, I thought the image was glitching. The movement seemed strange, unnatural, almost delayed. Like a person stepping into view one frame at a time. I leaned closer to the screen. A figure slowly emerged from the darkness. Small, child-sized, standing just beyond the edge of the porch. The video had no sound, but I remember my apartment suddenly feeling very quiet. The figure remained motionless, not crouching, not hiding, simply standing there, watching the camera, watching the house. The porch light should have revealed details. It should have shown clothing, hair, a face, something. Instead, the image remained frustratingly unclear. The camera quality wasn't terrible, but it wasn't great either. The figure appeared slightly blurred, not because it was moving, because the darkness seemed to cling to its sounds. It's the only way I can describe it. The child stood perfectly still, no shifting weight, no fidgeting, no curiosity, just stillness. I replayed the clip, then again, then again. Each viewing lasted roughly 20 seconds. The figure never moved, not once, no wave, no gesture, no visible breathing. Nothing. At the end of the recording, the video simply stopped. The figure remained standing there until the final frame. Then the clip ended. I immediately opened the rest of the camera history. If someone had approached my house, there should have been footage showing them arrive. If someone had left, there should have been footage showing them leave. That was the entire purpose of the camera system. I checked every alert, every recording, nothing, no arrival, no departure. The figure existed only in that single 20-second clip. Before it, the walkway was empty. After it, the walkway was empty. I searched for nearly an hour. The result never changed. Eventually, I sat on the edge of my bed staring at my phone. The house remained silent around me. A strange realization settled over me. This was the first time anything unusual had happened outside the shopping center. Outside work. Outside the places I'd spent years associating with fear and exhaustion. There was no overnight shift to blame. No sleep deprivation. No dark retail store. Just my home. The one place that was supposed to feel safe. I wanted a logical explanation. A neighborhood kid. A prank. Some teenager trying to scare people. The problem was that none of those explanations answered the question that kept bothering me. If it was a kid, where did he go? The next morning, I showed the clip to a friend from work, a guy named Eric. We ate lunch together most days. Practical guy. The kind of person who fixed things himself instead of calling repairmen. If a sink leaked, Eric repaired it. If a car broke down, Eric repaired it. If something strange happened, Eric found a rational explanation. That's why I showed him. I needed rational. I needed normal. Eric watched the clip twice, then a third time. Finally, he shrugged. Probably a kid. I nodded. Maybe looks like he's messing with the camera. Maybe you got a lot of teenagers around your neighborhood? Not really. He watched the clip again, then paused it. The figure stood frozen near the edge of the frame. Eric frowned. For the first time, uncertainty crossed his face. What? I asked. He hesitated, then shook his head. What? I don't know. He pointed at the screen. Just stands weird. I looked at the paused image. The figure remained motionless. Arms hanging straight down, head facing forward, perfectly still. Eric shifted uncomfortably. Kids don't usually stand like that. Neither of us spoke for a moment. Then he laughed and pushed the phone back toward me. Still probably a prank. Probably. That word stayed with me all day. Probably. Not definitely. Not certainly. Probably. And somehow that single word bothered me far more than I wanted to admit. Because deep down I was starting to suspect something I wasn't ready to say out loud. The calls had stopped, but whatever had been making them hadn't gone away. It had simply found a different way to get my attention. A week later, it happened again. 3:07 a.m. Another motion alert. By then, I'd already developed a bad habit. Every night before bed, I'd check the camera app. Every morning, I'd check it, nothing. That morning was different. The notification was waiting when I woke up. My stomach sank before I even opened it. I already knew what I was going to see. The video loaded. This time there wasn't one figure. There were two. They stood side by side at the edge of my driveway. Both child-sized, both completely motionless. Just standing there, watching the house, watching the camera. The footage lasted 15 seconds. Neither one moved, not even slightly. Then the clip ended. I immediately checked the recordings before and after. Nothing. No approach, no departure, no movement anywhere near the property. The figure simply appeared in one recording and disappeared in the next. By that point, I stopped showing the videos to other people. Nobody ever had a good explanation, and honestly, I wasn't sure I wanted one anymore. The following month became a pattern. Every few nights, another alert appeared. Sometimes there was one figure, sometimes two. Once there were four. Always at 3:07, always standing still, always watching, never moving. Never getting closer, until one night they did. I opened a motion alert and nearly dropped my phone. One figure stood directly at the bottom of my front steps, closer than ever before. Close enough that the porch light illuminated part of its face. The image quality was terrible, grainy, distorted. But for the first time I could tell it wasn't wearing a mask, and it wasn't a shadow. It looked pale, unnaturally pale. The eyes appeared dark. Far too dark. I closed the app immediately. For the first time since all of this began, I didn't watch the video again. I didn't want to. Something inside me already knew where this was going. A few days later, I woke up suddenly. No notification, no sound, just awake. The room was dark. The digital clock beside my bed read 3:07. Exactly. Then I noticed a blue glow coming from downstairs. At first, I thought I'd left the television on. But I never left the television on. Never. I sat frozen for almost a minute before finally getting out of bed. The house was silent. Every light was off. Only that faint blue glow drifted up from the living room. I walked downstairs slowly, one step at a time, and when I reached the bottom, I stopped. My television was on. The screen displayed security footage, old security footage. Footage from the shopping center. I recognized it immediately. The shoe store. The same aisle where everything had started years earlier. The camera showed an empty aisle. Nothing moved, nothing happened. For several seconds, the screen remained unchanged. Then a small figure stepped into view, a child, or something pretending to be one. It walked directly toward the camera, closer, 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 until its face filled the screen. For the first time, I saw it clearly. Pale skin, black eyes, an impossibly wide smile stretching across its face. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't look away. The image froze, the smile remained, then the television speakers crackled. A child's voice spoke, soft, calm, almost cheerful. 3 simple words: "We know everything." The screen immediately went black. The television shut off. The room fell silent, and in that silence I finally understood something. This wasn't trying to scare me anymore. It wasn't warning me, it wasn't haunting me, it was reminding me. Every theft, every lie, every excuse, it knew all of it, and somehow it always had. The next morning I unplugged the television, loaded it into my truck, and took it to a landfill outside town. 2 months later I moved. New house, new town, new job. I changed everything I could change. The phone calls never returned. The camera alerts stopped. The figures disappeared. Years have passed since then. I've never seen another shadow child, never heard the laughter, never received another call at 3-7. Most days I convince myself it was guilt, stress, exhaustion. Maybe my conscience finally found a way to punish me. Maybe that's all it ever was. But sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night. And before I even look at the clock, I already know what time it is. Because part of me is still afraid I'll see 3:07 glowing in the darkness. And if I ever walk downstairs again, the television might already be waiting. I wish I could tell you there was some final answer, some police report, some hidden truth, some explanation that tied everything together neatly. There isn't. That's probably the hardest part. People hear stories like this and expect a reveal at the end. A monster gets identified, a ghost gets a name, a mystery gets solved. Life doesn't always work that way. Sometimes things happen, then they stop, and all you're left with are questions. For a long time, I tried to find answers. After I moved, I spent months digging into the history of that shopping center. At first, it was just curiosity. Then it became an obsession. I searched old newspaper archives, property records, local forums, anything I could find. I kept thinking there had to be something. A tragedy, a fire, missing children. Some event that would explain the laughter, the figures, the voices, the camera footage. I found almost nothing. The plaza had been built in the late 90s. Before that, the land had mostly been farmland. There were no famous murders, no documented hauntings, no local legends. Nothing that explained what I'd experienced. The lack of answers somehow bothered me more than a supernatural explanation would have. At least a ghost story gives you something to hold on to. This gave me nothing, just empty space where answers should have been. Eventually, I forced myself to stop looking. I got older. Life moved forward. Work became work. Bills became bills. The ordinary responsibilities of adulthood slowly pushed everything else aside. Years passed. The story became something I rarely talked about. Most people in my life never heard it. A few close friends knew parts of it. Nobody knew everything, not because I was embarrassed, because saying it out loud always made it sound unreal, even to me. Then something happened that brought it all back. About 3 years ago, I was cleaning out old boxes in my garage. The kind of job everybody puts off forever. Dusty boxes, old paperwork, broken electronics, junk you keep for no reason. Near the bottom of one box, I found an old security badge. The badge from the shopping center. I'd completely forgotten I still had it. The photo showed a younger version of me. Thinner, tired-looking, trying much harder than he deserved to look respectable. I stared at that badge for a long time. Long enough to remember everything. The empty stores, the laughter, the televisions, the voice, and the thing that bothered me most wasn't fear anymore, it was guilt. Because the older I got, the more I realized something. The story was never really about the shadow figures. Not for me. The fear came later. The haunting came later. The story actually began with a choice I made over and over again. Nobody forced me to steal. Nobody tricked me. Nobody manipulated me. I did it because I thought I could get away with it, and for a while I did. Maybe that's why the word still sticks with me after all these years. Not the laughter, not the shadows, not the face on the television, that single word, thief. Because it was true. Whatever happened in that shopping center, whatever those figures were, they never lied to me. That word fit. Perfectly. Maybe that's why it scared me so much. Not because something supernatural knew it. Because I knew it too. And hearing it out loud meant I couldn't hide from it anymore. A few months after finding the badge, I finally threw it away. Not dramatically, no ceremony, no speech. I dropped it into a trash bag with a pile of other junk and carried everything to the curb. As the garbage truck pulled away the next morning, I remember feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Relief. Real relief. Not because I thought I'd defeated anything. Not because I thought the haunting was over. Because for the first time, I stopped carrying it around. The fear, the guilt, the questions, all of it. At some point, you realize you're never getting answers. And strangely enough, that's okay. These days, my life is ordinary. Exactly the way I like it. I go to work. I come home. I watch television. I complain about my back hurting more than it used to. I fall asleep on the couch sometimes. Nothing exciting, nothing supernatural. Just life. And honestly, that's enough for me. But every once in a while, usually when I can't sleep, I find myself awake in the middle of the night. The house quiet, the neighborhood silent, everything still. I'll roll over and glance at the clock beside the bed. Just a quick look, nothing more. Most nights it's 1:42, or 2:18, or some random time that means absolutely nothing. Then there are the other nights. The nights when the glowing numbers read 37, and every single time, no matter how many years have passed, I feel the same chill crawl up my spine. Not because the phone rings anymore, it doesn't. Not because the television turns on, it doesn't. Not because I expect to see figures outside, I don't. I simply lie there listening to the silence, waiting for a few seconds, maybe a minute, sometimes longer. Then eventually I remind myself that nothing is there, nothing is coming, everything is fine. And most of the time, that's true most of the time. Still, every now and then, just before I close my eyes, I can't help thinking about that final message on the television. The child smiling into the camera, the black eyes, the voice, we know. 3 simple words, 3 words I spent years trying to understand. Now I think maybe I finally do. I don't think they meant they knew where I lived or what I had done or where I was going. I think they meant something much simpler. I think they meant they knew exactly who I was, the person I had been, the person I was trying to become, the parts of myself I wanted to hide. And maybe that's why I never saw them again. Maybe the haunting ended because there was nothing left to reveal. Or maybe they're still out there somewhere, standing at the edge of another camera frame, waiting outside another house, watching someone else who thinks their secrets belong only to them. I honestly don't know. And after all these years, I've stopped trying to find out. But if my phone ever rings again at 3:07 in the morning, I already know one thing. This time I won't answer.